You can't hurt me, but I can hurt you.
Imagine a desolate wasteland where the scorched earth stretches to the horizon, punctuated only by twisted metal structures and the desperate survivors who call this hell home. A lone spacecraft descends through toxic clouds, carrying a reluctant hero who's about to discover that in this forbidden zone, humanity's worst instincts have been given free rein.
What the hell are you?
What do you think I am, you scrawny nerdbag? I'm a woman!
This is the world of Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, a film that dropped into theaters in 1983 when science fiction was undergoing a transformation. When Spacehunter arrived, it landed squarely in the middle of America's 3D revival craze. Star Wars had revolutionized sci-fi just 6 years earlier, and studios were frantically searching for the next big space adventure. Meanwhile, the 3D gimmick was being resurrected to lure audiences away from their newly purchased VCRs and back into theaters. Columbia Pictures gambled that combining these trends might strike gold. With a modest budget of $14.4 million, substantial for the time but still conservative for a sci-fi adventure, Spacehunter managed to earn only $16.5 million at the box office. On paper, a commercial disappointment. But numbers rarely tell the whole story, especially for films that find their audience long after the theatrical run ends. In this video, we'll explore how Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, became a cult sci-fi treasure despite its commercial challenges. From its ambitious early use of 3D technology to its surprisingly compelling performances and world building, we'll uncover why this seemingly forgettable B-movie continues to captivate viewers 4 decades later, and how it represents a fascinating snapshot of 1980s genre filmmaking at its most experimental. Spacehunter's technical achievements might seem quaint by today's standards, but in 1983, the film was pushing boundaries, particularly with its implementation of 3D technology. The sequence where Wolf's spacecraft navigates through the toxic atmosphere of Terra 11 showcases the filmmaker's ambition, using the 3D effect to create a genuine sense of depth and danger. The production team employed the then cutting-edge AriVision 3D system, the same technology used for Jaws 3D that same year, but arguably to better effect. The visuals of Spacehunter are strikingly inventive given their limitations. The film's production design team, led by Jackson Degovia, crafted a dystopian wasteland that feels genuinely lived in and distinct from other post-apocalyptic settings of the era. The vehicular designs, particularly Wolf's multi-terrain transport, blend function with personality, reminiscent of Mad Max but with its own unique flair. When Wolf's vehicle transforms to navigate the acid lakes, the practical engineering solutions feel genuine rather than merely convenient plot devices. What truly distinguishes Spacehunter's technical approach is its commitment to in-camera effects whenever possible. The film's creature designs, created by special effects, veterans who had worked on Star Wars, utilized a combination of practical puppetry and costuming that gave the wasteland denizens a tactile quality missing from many contemporary sci-fi productions. The Sandworms sequence, where primitive motion control photography was combined with miniature work and full-scale practical elements, demonstrates the production team's resourcefulness in creating convincing threats without relying on optical compositing techniques that would have strained the budget. The color palette shifts deliberately throughout the film, from the sterile blues and whites of Wolf's spacecraft to the burnt oranges and browns of the wasteland, and finally to the sickly greens and shadows of Overdog's underground lair. Each environment tells its own visual story about the degradation of civilization on this forgotten world. Production wasn't easy. Filming in 3D in the early 80s meant bulky camera rigs that frequently malfunctioned in the challenging outdoor locations. Much of the film was shot in the harsh terrain outside Moab, Utah, where temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees. These conditions forced the team to innovate, particularly with the practical effects. When one of the main creature costumes was damaged during transport, The effects team had to rebuild it overnight using materials scavenged from local hardware stores, resulting in the distinctive asymmetrical look of the chemist character. Here's a fun fact. The film's original screenplay actually called for much more extensive world building and character development, including a complex backstory for the Terra 11 civilization. Budget constraints forced the filmmakers to streamline the story significantly, but remnants of this deeper mythology can still be spotted in background details. The mysterious symbols carved into the rock formations throughout the wasteland were actually part of a developed written language for the planet's original inhabitants. Say detail that went largely unexplained in the final cut, but demonstrates the depth of thought that went into this seemingly straightforward adventure. The performances in Spacehunter elevate the material beyond typical B-movie fare. Peter Strauss as Wolf brings a world-weary gravitas to what could have been a generic hero. His background in television dramas like Rich Man, Poor Man gave him the dramatic chops to make Wolf's journey from mercenary to reluctant savior believable. Watch his expression in the scene where he discovers the fate of the Earth colony. His eyes convey years of witnessed tragedies without a word of dialogue. Perhaps the most surprising performance comes from a 14-year-old Molly Ringwald as Nikki, just a year before she would become John Hughes's muse. Her portrayal of the scrappy wasteland survivor balances vulnerability with fierce independence. During the sequence where she leads Wolf through the underground tunnels, Ringwald's physical performance, the way she moves like someone who's learned to survive by being quick and small, tells us everything about life on Terra 11. Her chemistry with Strauss creates the emotional core of the film, as their relationship evolves from mutual irritation to genuine connection. Michael Ironside's portrayal of Overdog remains one of science fiction's most underrated villains. Suspended in his mechanical apparatus with only his head and arms mobile, Ironside had to convey menace almost entirely through facial expressions and voice. The scene where he first appears, draining the life force from a prisoner while explaining his philosophy with almost casual cruelty, is genuinely disturbing because Ironside commits so completely to the character's warped perspective. Ernie Hudson rounds out the main cast as Washington, bringing much-needed humor and humanity to the proceedings. His reaction when discovering the mutants' ambush plan provides one of the film's most memorable lines, "Man, these folks got a real attitude problem." Hudson's natural charisma makes Washington more than just a sidekick. He's the moral compass that helps guide Wolf back to his better nature. The film's most effective sequence comes when Wolf finally infiltrates Overdog's lair. The neon-lit gladiatorial arena, filled with baying crowds demanding violence, creates a disturbing parallel to the civilization these colonists left behind. This moment crystallizes the film's central theme. Even in the most extreme environments, humans recreate the same social structures and cruelties. We bring our darkness with us wherever we go. Interestingly, Andrea Martin was originally cast in a larger role as a wasteland mystic who helps the heroes, but most of her scenes were cut when the producers decided to streamline the film for a faster pace. Her character would have added another dimension to the world building, but the decision to focus on the core journey of Wolf and Nikki ultimately created a tighter narrative. The remnants of her role can still be glimpsed in a few background shots during the Scav village sequence. Critics, in 1983, were largely dismissive of Spacehunter, with many reviewing it as little more than a Star Wars knockoff with an added 3D gimmick. Roger Ebert gave it a tepid 2 stars, calling it a confused, poorly edited film that doesn't make good use of its 3D effects or its actors. Variety was somewhat kinder, noting that despite derivative elements, there's an earnestness to the adventure that partially redeems its formulaic approach. But over time, Spacehunter has undergone a fascinating critical rehabilitation. What once seemed derivative now appears prescient. The film's blend of post-apocalyptic wasteland aesthetics with space adventure elements prefigured countless later works. Its practical effects and lived-in world design have aged better than many of its contemporaries' more ambitious but less tangible special effects. The film's timing contributed significantly to its initial reception challenges. Released just 2 weeks before Return of the Jedi, Spacehunter was inevitably overshadowed by the conclusion of the original Star Wars trilogy. This unfortunate scheduling decision essentially guaranteed that the film would be viewed as a pale imitation rather than on its own merits. Adding to this challenge, it competed directly with another 3D sci-fi film, Metal Storm: The Destruction of Jared Sin, creating a market saturation that diluted audience interest in both productions. Film historians have noted that Spacehunter represents an interesting transition point in science fiction cinema, coming after the revolutionary special effects of films like Star Wars and Alien, but before the CGI revolution that would begin in the late 80s. This placed the film in a technological no man's land, where audience expectations for visual spectacle were increasing, but the tools to meet those expectations economically were still developing. The VHS release in 1984 presented a particular challenge. The film's 3D effects were completely lost in the home video format, but the cinematography had been composed specifically to showcase these effects. Scenes that made visual sense in 3D often appeared oddly framed or unnecessarily exaggerated when viewed in 2D. It wasn't until the DVD release in 2001 that the film received a proper transfer that attempted to compensate for this format transition, allowing home viewers to better appreciate the original visual composition. The film faced particular backlash over its 3D implementation, which many viewers found distracting rather than immersive. The technology of the era required special polarized glasses that often caused headaches during feature-length viewing. This technical limitation overshadowed the actual content for many initial viewers. The 2D home video releases in subsequent years allowed audiences to engage with the story and characters without the distraction of primitive 3D effects, contributing to its growing cult status. Audience perception has shifted dramatically from seeing Spacehunter as a failed blockbuster to appreciating it as an earnest genre experiment. Online communities dedicated to 80s sci-fi regularly cite the film as an underappreciated gem. The film's current 6.1 out of 10 rating on IMDb, while not stellar, represents a significant improvement from its initial reception and places it above many of its contemporaries in the early 80s sci-fi boom. Did you catch the subtle nod to Ridley Scott's Alien during the sequence where Wolf explores the derelict spacecraft? The production design team deliberately incorporated similar biomechanical elements in the ship's interior as a homage. This wasn't just aesthetic borrowing. It was a deliberate suggestion that both films might exist in a shared universe where certain design elements became standardized in future spacecraft construction. It's a subtle touch that deepens the world building and connects to broader sci-fi traditions. Another easily missed detail: the weapons used by Overdog's forces feature the same corporate logo as seen on Wolf's abandoned military gear, implying that both the hero and villain were once supplied by the same interstellar arms manufacturer. This subtle background element adds a layer of commentary about the military-industrial complex that feels surprisingly modern for a 1983 adventure film. As home video formats improved, fans began to notice these and other details that had gone unremarked in theatrical viewings. The ability to pause, rewind, and study the film frame by frame transformed Spacehunter from a forgettable theatrical experience to a text worth analyzing, a transformation that mirrors the evolution of science fiction fandom itself, from casual viewers to dedicated scholars of the genre. The impact of Spacehunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone extends far beyond its modest theatrical run. Elements of its visual language can be traced through later science fiction works, from the vehicular designs in Kevin Costner's Waterworld to the wasteland aesthetics of the recent Mad Max: Fury Road. The film's blend of space adventure with post-apocalyptic survival themes created a template that many subsequent works have followed, often with bigger budgets, but similar narrative structures. what makes Spacehunter particularly relevant today is how it represents a pivotal moment in science fiction filmmaking, when the genre was transitioning from the optimistic space opera of Star Wars toward the grittier, more dystopian visions that would dominate much of 80s and 90s sci-fi. This evolution mirrors our own cultural shifts from the boundless technological optimism of the space age to our more complicated relationship with technology and progress today. The film's themes of environmental devastation and societal collapse following colonization of new worlds feel eerily prescient in our current climate crisis era. When Wolf discovers that the once promising colony has devolved into warring factions fighting over dwindling resources, it reads less like science fiction fantasy and more like a potential future we're actively trying to avoid. Spacehunter has found new life in the streaming era, where algorithms regularly surface forgotten gems to viewers based on viewing patterns. The film's availability on multiple platforms has introduced it to generations of viewers who weren't alive for its original release. Its practical effects and earnest storytelling have aged surprisingly well in an era where audiences are increasingly skeptical of CGI spectacle without substance. The current cultural obsession with 80s nostalgia has also contributed to Spacehunter's resurgence. The film captures a specific moment in science fiction history, complete with synthesizer score, practical effects, and a young Molly Ringwald that resonate strongly with contemporary nostalgia-driven properties like Stranger Things and Ready Player One. What once seemed dated now feels charmingly retro. Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone isn't just a curious artifact of 80s filmmaking. It's a testament to the power of imagination over budget, and how films that fail to connect commercially can still find their audience over time. In today's franchise-dominated landscape, there's something refreshing about revisiting a science fiction film that wasn't designed to launch a multi-film universe, but simply to tell one strange, ambitious story. The lasting appeal of Spacehunter lies not in its perfection, but in its peculiarity. It represents a road less traveled in science fiction cinema, one where the rough edges and odd creative choices often prove more memorable than polished predictability. In an era of algorithm-designed entertainment, films like Spacehunter remind us of the value of creative risk-taking, even when the results aren't immediately appreciated. What do you think? Has Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone earned its cult status? Or is it merely benefiting from nostalgic goodwill? Is there something special in the DNA of early 80s sci-fi adventures that today's more technically advanced, but perhaps less imaginative productions are missing? Share your thoughts below, and be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of science fiction cinema.